Thanks so much for joining us. It's a great pleasure to have with us today David Yazdan, CEO, and Todd Peters, Director of Research of Lyndhurst Investment Partners. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us, Oliver.
And look forward to learning from you. The topic for today's conversations is really the preconditions for success as an investment manager. And we're going to make the distinction between investment success and business success, as perhaps counterintuitively, the two do not always go hand in hand. So look forward to learning from you. Before we get into the topic itself, David, perhaps we can start with you. If you could tell us a bit about your path as an investor and then how you became interested in evaluating managers instead of companies to invest in.
Well, I actually started my career on the marketing side and probably spent most of the 90s doing institutional sales for a value firm. It was a great learning experience. During that time, I got to meet Todd. And Todd was really an influence to me on how to think about doing research on managers. Prior to that, it was, I had gotten my MBA. I had wanted to sort of get into research, but realized that my skill set was talking about the managers and the styles and building relationships with clients, both individuals and institutions. So really the genesis of Lyndhurst was the outgrowth of learning from some of the best in breed managers on what they thought the preconditions for investment success were. When I met Todd, Todd was an individual who sort of reminded me of myself in the sense that he had a chip on his shoulder as it related to active management versus passive management and diversified portfolios versus more concentrated portfolios, and had a great disdain for following the herd. So we, over time, developed a friendship. He would come in and do due diligence meetings with the managers I represented, and was always thoughtful and prepared. And I found that we shared similar investment views. And I think one of the things that a little gem that Todd brought to me was that size can often be the enemy of returns. And so we thought that if we could find a way to work together,
Yep.
And possibly use our skill sets that may be quite different, but we've had exposure to a lot of the things we've come to find attractive in managers, let's do it. And fortunately, through time, Todd had been in research, become an outsourced CIO, and then was also helping coach managers, emerging managers, to learn how to market themselves, go through the due diligence process, work on their communications in terms of letters and pitch books, and really get them ready for prime time. In that experience, he was able to meet a lot of great managers, and I think he was able to vet those managers in a way that I felt comfortable about as well. In that process, I think 2007, 2008 was when we met our first manager that we represent, and it was a manager that we had been reading the letters, we'd done some meetings with, and I said, Todd, I think these guys have what it takes. They were a tiny fund, didn't want to get too big, but had all the preconditions, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail. And Todd went in and did his work, and came out probably feeling as confident about them as I did. And in 2009, we decided to launch Lyndhurst Investment Partners, which was a natural extension to what Todd was already doing, but fulfilling a capital raising function and a retention function.
And the same, my background really started at the institutional consultant level and then at the big firm level. And when I entered the business, which was in the mid-90s, it was one where you were starting to get beat in the head about style box this and style box that. And it was in the late 90s I started to question that, because you started seeing portfolios of thousands of securities because they were filling 9 boxes or 12, however you sliced it. And it was very fortuitous in my career of meeting Dave when I did, because the firm that Dave was working at to this day is the most important firm I ever met, because it created the path of which I wanted to go, which was stop worrying about where everything fits and let's just focus on, are you good at picking investments? Don't handcuff, let good people do their job and give them the flexibility to do that. And then it was through that relationship that we had an opportunity to start really comparing notes. We started really talking about it, and Dave has always been extremely supportive of my career prior to even starting Lyndhurst, and so it gave us that opportunity to really start working through not only investment sides of the questions, but the business sides of questions, what to look for. And so when we finally did want to come together and form Lyndhurst Investment Partners, we kind of had figured out these are the characteristics that we want to look for, and it was really kind of that mutual approach. But it was very interesting in that we benefited each other while we were both learning at bigger firms what we didn't necessarily like about the big firms we were at, to try to create a small business of our own, and then look to other managers that were at that level that knew how to grow and invest from there.
And I think there's no denying that there's a place for some of these larger managers, the Mavericks, the Yorks, the Janas, the Third Points, and they're able to, and the Carl Icahns, and they're able to use that size to their advantage.
Absolutely.
I think it takes a specific type of investor to handle that size of a portfolio. I think it does become more difficult, and I think it's a rarity that you can do it at that size. But I also, what I would also stress is that you don't need Lyndhurst to find those managers. We think there's a real void when you look at some of these larger consulting firms, because they need scale. They're built to be able to allocate a manager to multiple clients, hopefully all of their clients. And if their clients are multiple billions in size, you can't look at $1 billion limited capacity strategy. It's just, unless you have dedicated resources, which fortunately a lot of these larger endowments are dedicating groups, departments, and resources to find emerging managers, because they understand that to pair something with a larger manager like a Greenlight, you want to invest in a Kingstown or a smaller manager that can look at middle market names, that can do smaller securities when the opportunities are there, and it's a nice complement to some of those larger names. But we think that industry is built around being able to do the work on a manager and then not worry about it closing before they get all their clients in, if that makes sense.